Welcome everyone to Voices from the Field, a webinar series hosted by Local Futures, featuring people who have hands-on experience with actions and strategies that can help us localize. I'm Gayle. My colleague Alex Jensen and I are hosting this fourth webinar of the series with a spotlight on building car-free transportation networks and their importance to economic localization. Our guest speaker today is Shail Shrestha, joining us from Kathmandu, Nepal. Shail is co-founder of the Digo Bikas Institute, a Nepali research and advocacy organization committed to promoting ecological sustainability and social equity at both the policy and community levels. He currently leads their sustainability school program. His transportation activism started with the Kathmandu Cycle City 2020 campaign in 2009. He later became the founding president of Cycle City Network Nepal. He has represented Nepal in global assemblies of bicycle activists and has participated in 2 United Nations Conference of the Parties events, COP21 and COP26. He organized the 9th World Bicycle Forum in Nepal in 2020 and is a founding member and the Nepal coordinator of the Car-Free Cities Alliance, a global network dedicated to the development and promotion of a car-free urban future. He's a strong advocate for economic localization. So welcome Shail and Alex and everyone joining us today.
Thank you, Curdy. I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I'd like to start with my activism that started in 2009 with this idea that in the next 10 years, by 2020, we are going to make Kathmandu cycle friendly. And then gradually half my activism, I realized that when in Kathmandu, the first celebrated, well-recognized cycle lane came along with Kathmandu's first urban highway. There was a 3-lane route, and that was converted into a 6-lane 6-lane urban highway, and then with it came the cycle lane, and that was first we did celebrate it, but then I was like, is this what I was like advocating for, and I really had to rethink, about what I meant that is cycle friendly, or what was I seeking for. And then I could really realize that the ancient settlements or the ancient city center of Kathmandu was way more, inviting and one of the favorite places among youths. And so I started seeking out, I did not know what the reason was, but that these ancient city centers was one of the favorite place where you could experience life in a very different time frame, Like many say that Nepal, you can see different centuries coexisting in Kathmandu, and I did not know why it was so. But then I started exploring in different terms, and then I gradually found out about the car-free movement, the car-free cities, network, World Car-Free Network, and all that. And I found out that one of the settlements of the Kathmandu was also listed in the list. So I started exploring and realized that one of the primary factor why it is so pleasant to be was that these settlements were built for people. And they were built before the times cars were invented. And that is why they were very people-centric. They were very, intersections were not roundabouts, but they were like a place, they were public spaces. Intersections were where people met and interacted. And so it was, the scale of it and all came up on my mind on how, when you design settlements for people, then it's a different experience, and how those physical infrastructure impacts its economy, its socio-cultural factors and everything. So for me it was quite easy, because a 15-minute walk could take me from a people-centric neighborhood to a car-centric street, So it is quite a experience to be in. Car-free city is something that is not too much to ask, but something that that is from the past, but is more futuristic. So one of the comments about 15-minute city, they may not directly talk about localization, but then, the idea that having a 15-minute settlement mix where everything is accessible in travel distance, and walking or bicycling around in 15 minutes is something that is a different term to the same concept.
Great. Great, thank you. How does the car-centered development versus more of a car-free settlement like Bhaktapur impact on the economy, the local economy in this case?
Yeah, definitely. I usually say that for a local future, for a local spirit, car-free is the body that can, that can make that happen. It's the perfect body on which local spirit can exist. And in different terms, if you're planning for speed, in different sense, if you're planning for speed, and if the center of your planning is on import and export of goods and people, then that is what is going to happen more. And other things play a different role, when you are planning for that. But if you are planning for people, if you're planning for walking, then it naturally makes things more obvious to you know to localize. Like, for example, if I'll actually begin with two pictures of what I meant. I'll show two pictures of what a car-centric part of Kathmandu and people-centric part of Kathmandu looks like, and the discussion will go better. So this is the center of Bhaktapur, one of the many ancient settlements that were built before the invention of cars. And so this is the let's say the center, where many streets come about, many streets come within, and you can see that the center is celebrated with art. It is a place where people come and relax, It's where strangers meet and interact. So I think in different forms, what I also believe is that settlements are the largest manifestation of the psyche of the times when they were invented. And I see, like, so what is in the center is something that the people of the time believes has to be in access to everybody. And I think this talks about how much preference they gave to pleasure, they gave to leisure, they gave to arts as a center. So I'll take this next slide is about the new center, the new center of the modern part of Kathmandu. And it's an obvious center that we see all around. This is a roundabout, and this is where pace, speed, trade, economy may take center, where access to transportation is the center of your planning. And I think this also represents that the present time prioritize speed, competition, and all that comes with it. So I think these two can actually explain on what we're trying to say when we say car-free cities, and how it differentiates, how it defines what kind of a lifestyle we're talking about. So I'm also showing some slides of other intersections. These are also from Bhaktapur, one of the ancient settlements, where intersections have a place. This is called a party. where every intersection of the ancient settlement has this semi, public space where you can have space to meet strangers or meet your friends and have interaction. And usually you find senior citizens or kids playing around, depending on the weather. If it's if it is winter, you box the sun. If it is summer, you sit in the shade and interact. And sometimes you also see farm products that were grown around the settlement that are also offered in the street right there. And you can also realize that when we are talking about car-free cities or cities that were built for people, you can also see that public space is not a destination, but it is the journey itself. Like all the houses are right connected, right in front of your gate, right outside your house is a network of public space. So the entire street, entire neighborhood is a set of public space where you can really play and grow. Unlike car-centric designs, it is not a destination where you have to drive or walk to for a public space, for you to experience public space. And I think this builds into a lot of resilience because the network is so neat, so well built. How that also encourages into local coexistence and a connection to the neighborhood. You also are so well connected to each other that your future is also localized. It's quite difficult for people when you are so well connected to the neighborhood and when your identity is so close to where you live that you plan your future around it. And that's I think that is one way how this globalization of your dreams, globalization of your economic plans and everything is very, very well protected in this area, in Kathmandu as well, in parts that were where ancient neighborhoods are still well protected. There you can see a lot of youths who are still there and who can see their future there and who are planning about things around it.
One quick observation, the photo you showed of the highway intersection or a roundabout in Kathmandu from the air. I found it striking that picture could almost be from anywhere, which is almost the point, right? Like this kind of development facilitates and almost forces a kind of monoculture that obviously it's like the veins and arteries of the global economy in these massive scale infrastructure. And that, however, unfortunately, and maybe you can speak more about this, is the development model that's been exported all over the world as the kind of infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order to, develop, quote unquote. And yet at the same time, ironically, we find that Bhaktapur is exactly the sort of place that many sort of enlightened city governments around the world are aspiring to create again. So Paris, became famous under the mayor for the 15-minute city. But as you've already said, Bhaktapur already was a 15-minute city. But now many places which are trying to become car-free, which were designed originally, the infrastructure was built for the car. This is particularly the case in places like the US, where many of the settlements really did come up with the car. They didn't predate the car. And so I think also, yeah, if you could speak a bit about that sort of turning the idea of development around that this discussion brings up, but also because many people joining this call and generally will be from places where the development is car centered. And so in a place like that, unfortunately, unlike Bhaktapur, don't have a legacy of car-free design to build from. Basically, a car-free design has to be struggled for, has to be created. And as you mentioned at the beginning, that's much more difficult to put in bike lanes, like to make a small wedge for pedestrians and cyclists where cars already dominate. So what are your thoughts on and advice, really? I mean, because you have so much experience from the Car-Free Cities Alliance and your activism around the world. What do you say in terms of how we can move forward, including in places that are designed around the car?
Yeah, definitely, Alex. I think one of the cases that we use in saying how much land is dedicated to cars or the car culture is of LA, where almost 70% of the land is dedicated to cars. For multi-lane highways and for big chunk of land that has to be dedicated to parking wherever the car goes. And so the government has a lot of funds for that, funds to dedicate it for the car culture, and then a big portion of the building as well is dedicated to cars and for multi-story parking and also. But then we do not have lands to grow. We do not have lands, we do not have resources to go. So that is quite a quite a case that we use, that even in Nepal, like though we have this history or all around the world, 100 years ago, all the settlements were for people and car free. Now it sounds quite radical when we say, like if we are talking about car free, we sound quite radical and unpractical for many, and which has quite changed in the last 5 years. I think people had to be a little bit careful when they said car free, because they did not want people to be annoyed or to see themselves as quite radical. But now I think it's gotten quite popular. And then like 15-minute city, and a lot of concepts are taking front mainstream now. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to do it at a local scale. If we can build in car-free zone or start with car-free celebration that is happening in different names all around, like Slickovia in Latin America, that happens like almost every week, some places every year, every month. So they start with celebration of car-free streets and car-free zones, like temporary ban of vehicles, to experience, to publicly, collectively experience what it feels like to have no cars and to open up the space.
That reminds me, if you could just speak a little more about the Car-Free Cities Alliance, and what you do, and give some more examples besides Bhaktapur. Bhaktapur is obviously like an incredible model, but from the global movement, you could just talk a bit for a couple of minutes about what the Alliance is doing.
At the present, there is a lot of events that is happening, like World Car Free Day, especially in Europe, with the name European Mobility Week, where car free is one of the very important aspect of it. And then what happened is people involved in those movements came in together to see that there is a need to have a global alliance of this mobilization. And so cities, including Europe and Asia, came in together to see that this can have a more, it is not something that only developed countries can think of or plan. You don't have to be like a developed country first. Like somebody was saying, like, you can only celebrate bicycling once you own a car, even in Nepal. So that's the trick of our definition of development, and so there was, this alliance came in together with people from 7 different countries: India, Bangladesh, US, Netherlands, and Nepal, and so and so. And now we have an alliance of 15 different cities from around the world. And we are still reaching out to more people, like who are already doing movements on car-free mobilization, but not yet globally connected. Like the movement, market towns, like the market towns movement in New Zealand, and then the car-free referendum from Berlin, where youths are mobilizing at a larger scale to ensure that 88 kilometers square of the central Berlin becomes car-free in the long term, which is, I think, one of the largest call for a car-free, and car-free doesn't necessarily mean entirely motorized vehicle car-free, but it means like that the design makes priority to walking and cycling and non-motorized transport, and then public transport, and then emergency vehicles, and not that private vehicles are taken as the default, but something that comes as a need based. And what gives one of the ways to make that possible, I think that is quite a good example on how, like, already car-centric settlements can gradually switch into a car-free experience or car-free design. And what they're trying to do is a lot of decentralizing the services that you need in your everyday life, like like the 15-minute sitting, where it's not the transportation is not the main, traveling is not the main need, but access to services are. So how do you vaporize those needs of transportation, by decentralizing schools, markets, health services,
Exactly.
even public spaces, all that. So I think COVID gave us a big opportunity to experience that. When you could not travel, you realize that something, the sense of celebration, the sense of peace and pleasant that you see through your vacations is something that you need at walking distance. You had to create such spaces close by, and I think a lot of cities realize that street is such a place that can turn into Hawaiian beach, or the experience that you experience there can be built in the street, and that street is indeed a public space where you don't just have to run to go to a place that is defined for peace, and then those so
exactly it's like it's quite amazing how much of our sort of freedom and commonwealth we've handed over or inherited in many cases to the car, car industry and the road building industry and all the allied industries like oil and petroleum. It's really shocking if you experience a non-car centric place and then come back to a car centric place. It's very startling and striking. And I was thinking back to what you were saying about Berlin and our notions of development becoming obsolete, really, and how we still have these major institutions like the major international financial institutions and governments pouring huge money into continuing down the same road, so to speak, of highway development and so on. And yet, like you've shown pretty clearly, I think this is crushing communities. It's like annihilating communities, but it's done in the name of mobility.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's often that's sort of the excuse that this is mobility has to be improved. But the irony, as I'm sure so many people can attest to, is that these big highways tend to fill up with traffic full of cars, and suddenly you're stuck in traffic. And then the answer is always, let's make another lane of highway. And suddenly that fills up with traffic too. It induces traffic. I think this is the term, induce congestion. And still, like, no matter how many times this model fails, it seems to be like impossible to change the idea that mobility equals more roads than cars. Los Angeles, you mentioned earlier, 70% of the land dedicated to the car, if you add it all up. This is startling. And I think, Ivan Illich, the great social critic back in the 70s, in his book, Energy and Equity, he showed, he compared how efficient it is to move oneself by bicycle versus by car. And if you add in all the labor and energy and space needed to move a person by car compared to by a bicycle, it's actually much more efficient and faster to get to your destination if you were to subtract all of those normally hidden costs. So yeah, this is awesome. I was wondering if Carly wanted to chime in with any burning questions.
So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, so I think we can go ahead and get to those. I don't have any burning questions yet because, well, I have a question about everything mentioned. There's just so many avenues to explore, but let's go ahead and see. So we have our first question from an anonymous attendee is, so this is related to Bhaktapur, asked back when you were showing the photos. How are the current generations taking up to the old city settlements compared to the fast-paced new city settlements? How is acceptance shaping in the juxtaposition of these two forms of dwelling? So how are people moving to one or the other model in Nepal in the present era?
I think we are doing better than the past generation, so to speak, because particularly in Nepal, we have a political scenario where identity is playing a very important role, and at the same time, we are also playing around the politics where the communist government is committed to double-digit economic growth. At the same time, it's quite a mix of different identities in a way that you would not expect theoretically. But what is happening is, in the one hand, people believe in the bank's definition of what is less developed nation and what is developed, and they want to catch up. Definitely, the market-driven education system is also doing much more better than the past. and this idea about what development is, or what is prosperity, is also taking over. But then on the other hand, the culture is also taking a important role in our lives. So there is a bit of a struggle, and especially when we are talking about sustainable development, especially sustainable development goals. People may not be able to express how there is an irony in the goals of development, or the direction of the society through education system and all, and how the indicators of this is directing towards the other direction, and I think in Nepal, this aspiration of being a Western society, being more inspired by the West, and conservation of your own culture and your own ways of life is complicated, and there is a very important role to play there, to do the rethinking, or to actually rethink the school system that we so without question believe in, and I think all of this come together into the value system, where if even an hour of conversation can click to many. I've seen that, I've experienced that half an hour of conversation with politicians, or with youths, with students, can really bring in that change, because they might have experienced but do not have the words to express how to define these experience, or they have not found people to validate the irony of the crisis that they are experiencing. So I think on the one hand, in Nepal, especially at the government level, the government is so pro development, and they are talking about development that is very car centric, and on the other hand, there is a deep public mobilization that is happening in the conservation, with the attempt to conserve their culture and ancient settlements, which is being threatened by government's plan of fast double-digit development that they want to catch up with the rest of the world. And I think a very important link is there, that heritage conservation is not something just emotional, not something like to stick with the past, but that makes futuristic sense. When you're talking about heritage, or when you're talking about not just the physics, but the social spirit of what those cultures, or that small, strongly knit societies represent, is also now futuristic if we are talking about sustainable development goals. I think this small reach of these different ideas, or how do you like for me, I think these ancient settlements are not just in Nepal. There is a lot of people who believe in conservation of these small settlements, but nobody sees these settlements as something to be inspired to build new settlements, or they don't see it as a futuristic idea. But then an hour of conversation can really bring that up, in a better picture. So I think, unlike of the generation of my fathers, when they did feel like they were left out, like Nepal was Nepal had a lot of catch up to do, and so a lot of rush uh, to catch up with the world did not give them enough time to rethink or to evaluate enough to see which direction is better for the society or for them to take on. I think relatively, also because Nepal had, this generation has a lot of exposure of the West, like for Nepal, for my father's generation, having a car was a lifelong dream. But then when they got educated enough and they went abroad to study, and you could just get a car in a month of your, you know, month of being there as a student, or you start working, and then you could see that um, those entire life needed goals could be easily achieved. But then, did it give you peace? Like, did did it give you satisfaction, or the slow is the slow pace of life in Nepal really so bad? That you could compare in between. And I think youths now in Nepal are in a better position to do that rethinking, or to compare in between what is sold as prosperity in the media and what you really experience when you live in it. And I think in that case, though youths might not be in a clear cut understanding about these ideas, I think they are in a better position to make these decisions now.
It just shows how transportation in the built environment touches every aspect of our lives, from our cultures to our economies, the ways we interact, our aspirations for our lives. You said car is a lifelong dream versus next month dream. And yeah, like economic localization of it itself, everything is just so interconnected. And I'll respond a bit to this question on behalf of my context here in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in the US, where I see so many of the same patterns you mentioned. And I'm just thinking about the youth, folks my age, who are moving to older city settlements versus newer ones. And I think additional factors are that, ironically, it's like so many of these older city walkable settlements have become so popular that they're largely being used for Airbnbs or for other lodging, and the prices for staying there are skyrocketing and making it almost impossible for people to actually live in those places. And I think that sort of tourist or traveler orientation really speaks to how much we long for these places, like as a place of rest, as a place of a slower pace of life. We just really gravitate naturally towards human scale, like human paced settlements. But unfortunately, the economies are making it at the same time difficult to actually live there. And at least here in the US, a lot of the development, especially in the suburbs, is driven by development companies who may be out of touch with those ideals, rather than by planners who are consciously trying to choose creating walkable cities or supporting local businesses. And so we're faced, I think the youth really are interested in that, but we're faced with a lot of those economic factors stacked against us, as well as, the process of developing a community and really sinking roots into a place, as well as a lot of the increased care and maintenance that these older buildings and settlements require, is at odds with, we get a job and move to a new city for a few years, then we move somewhere else. Maybe we just want to live somewhere, not put down roots. We don't know how long we're going to stay. So I think, all of this really comes together, and having those conversations, as you said, just an hour of conversation like this one we're all having right here with all of you, to help recognize these factors in our lives and start consciously choosing a different path.
Yeah, definitely. I think, one way in thinking about car-free cities and localization of your future, like in Nepal, no matter which kind of, in Nepal, there are two kinds of education. One is private, like, organized by private companies, and the other is public schools that is organized by government. And what I believe in, what I understand, how I understand is either kind of school systems in Nepal are at the end promoting and selling private futures, how you individually, how your future is so individual as an independent, entity of a society, and how this school system separate you out of the society, to be to succeed in these school systems. You have to dedicate big part of your life to school in cost of your experience with the community, and how that itself becomes a reason that delinks you from the society. And that's one way how you start seeing that a prosperity or growth is you have to travel, you have to migrate somewhere else. And I think in the same way, if you are aspiring for car centric future, or if you believe in that growth of your individual life is going to happen through resources accumulation and then ownership of private vehicles and all that, then you can't achieve those dreams if you live in your own community. And this idea about car being the center of your prosperity at individual or societal scale demands you to travel to places where the society can afford you to have it, and in the other way, like a car free dream, or a car free, the scope of car free settlement also is a way to believe that development can be decentralized. I mean, you don't have to go to a city to experience that. In Nepal, a lot of migration is out of those needs, those definitions of prosperity that only a market-oriented economy can only make it happen at your lifespan. And the idea about car-free cities, at least in Nepal, where I'm in some of the campaigns that I'm involved in, the government themselves is investing on making settlements in present rural areas. Like there are 52 new town development projects that are being planned with the aim to decentralize development, and then at the same time to help youth aspire for future in their own place. But sadly, these are caste centric. But then our lobby is that you can have a better prosperous future if you plan for a car-free design, which is more affordable and also economically more viable and promising than a car-centric design. So if you are dreaming that if you believe in the idea, if the community believes in the idea that a more prosperous, it's not like giving away some of your facilities for the name of the environment, or for the sake of society, but then you are achieving a lot more out of those social benefits, or even economic benefits, like Curdy said, like one of the most successful economies through tourism and any other experience is car-free zones. So it really can decentralize scope of future for population anywhere around the world, especially for those countries who are in illusion that they are resourceless because they believe in loans as the only way to be resourceful. So I think in this manner as well, localization of your future, localization of aspiration, and car-free development also come very well together. And I think they all bottle down into what value systems, or what do you value the most? Or how
Yeah,
do you...
Shail, if I could jump in with a quick observation on that point. Exactly. You talked about the effect of the school system, the values that are sort of inculcated into people. But I think it's really important to recognize another major sort of vehicle, if you will, of propaganda for the car culture is the advertising of industry, which is a huge industry, and it's in the US. I know it's definitely provoking increase of sales of SUVs and large trucks. The size of cars is increasing, and is directly linked in many ways to the marketing and advertising of like big cars. And it's interesting what you said about the public sphere shrinking, but at the same time as the private sphere is expanding, and the SUV is sort of marketed as the privatization of security of the user, even if it makes the public space less safe for everyone else. And so more and more this notion that security, mobility, and life itself should be your private affair, you and your family or whatever. I think is something we also basically have to struggle against. That's a bigger struggle, like on a political level. But the power of the car industry in shaping those dreams, like implanting those dreams, firstly, cannot be understated, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we have one more question in the Q&A box right now. And then we also have a couple of really great comments in the chat that I'd like to read out. So I guess we'll start with the Q&A question, which is, so Kripendra is asking, due to the Russian war, the price of oil is going high, which I'm sure we're all feeling in various ways. And he notes that Nepal is becoming a country that's producing a surplus of electricity. He's mentioning that he's seen research showing that there are 4 potential routes to operate cable cars in Kathmandu, with the ticket costing 40 Rs per person. So he's just wondering, can cable cars replace traditional vehicles in Kathmandu? Traditional vehicles meaning cars, I assume.
Yeah, definitely, the mix of, not at the scale of the transportation that is happening now. Kripendraji also knows better in this. I think he's a transportation expert. If I'm speaking to the same Kripendra that I know separately as well. Also, if walkability, and the, and if bicycles and if decentralization of services, so that a lot of services can be accessed through walking distance, and if we minimize the need to do longer, mechanized transportation, if we minimize that to a lot small scale than that is right now, then definitely yes, cable cars or any form of like mass transit, like even trams and funiculars can be a good replacement. In fact, I also share that one of those 45 ancient settlements, one of them is called Kuratiba. And the mayor of Kuratiba did talk about it's a small hilly, settlement that is in the valley itself. And the mayor and the ward officers did publicly talk about their interest to make those settlements car-free. And they wanted to replace private vehicles with electric public transport. And the first response or the idea that came into me was like, if not public transport in the same vehicular route, but if we could replace with some funiculars, which which is even an older technology than cable cars. And that's why it is also cheaper. And I have been meeting some local communities and community leaders to explore the possibility of funiculars in Kuratiba to replace all private traffic, And yeah, that has been well received, and we are still in this discussion about, how that can be actually realized in real life. So yes, I think if we reduce the need, not at the scale as it is now, I think it's a bad idea to believe that all the, only by replacing petroleum through electrification of the transport at the scale that it is today it's still not the best idea, because all the other impacts of vehicular traffic apart from carbon emission will still be there, from safety, and also this need to travel and how much of time it takes away from our lives still remain there. So yeah, I think not at the scale of transportation needs that it is today, but if we reduce it to a lot less, then yes, mass transit can.
That makes sense. Yeah, related to that, so yeah, had you mentioned about the funiculars maybe being able to replace some vehicle traffic, but not all. Joel had a great comment, which is that for modern car-dependent communities, I'm just reading this out, for modern car-dependent communities, the concept of car-free is not very relevant because there are no alternatives there. So the key is to have strategies to increase the walking, cycling, and transit alternatives. One approach has been called re-urbanization. So a better slogan for these areas could be creating a walkable, transit supportive community so that 3-car families can become 1-car families. Reducing walking distances from homes to main roads and transit service to about 400 meters or a 5-minute walk, and transforming shopping areas with fast concrete parking lots into places with benches and planters, attractive destinations for walking, and vibrant public spaces. So I think even though totally car-free may be a dream for many of us that we can't always realize, especially in places with like here in the US with really limited zoning laws and really limited ability to expand and create whole new communities, reducing as much as we can. And that's, yeah, and that also goes for things like the advertising industry, like reducing and putting limits on just the sheer volume of commercials that we see. Anya wrote in the chat that global marketing expenditure in 2021 was around US $710 billion. Compared to the proposed $100 billion a year that rich countries have promised to mitigate climate change in the less wealthy nations. So yeah, I think especially up here, like policies all around from every stage, from the advertising to the land use, to building more bike lanes, is yeah, it's all needed. Anya also posted in the chat that a link to the neighborhood of Vauban in Freiburg in Germany, which has been able to deliberately create from an old abandoned French military base, a new neighborhood of the type we're envisioning, where public transit and like off-road bicycle lanes and off-road sidewalks are a reality that residents there did create over the course of several years beginning in the 1990s. So that's a great example to check out of how to bring that into the modern era. Any comments, Alex or Shail?
I wanted to give an example of New Zealand, where the market towns team are believing in how cooperative. I can see some people from some cooperative also in the chat, how they are planning for to build a car-free settlement through cooperative structure. They're bringing in like 100+ families together to plan a settlement where a collective settlement with market streets, schools, theaters, and where even if you own a car, you need to park it outside, or collectively also have a public transport to reach to the destination from some public public station, public transport station. So And the second spot they were planning on was in US. So even though we think like, oh, US is too far, and this, I think they did try to do that experiment also in US. So I think if enough critical mass come together, I think this realization can happen quicker than sooner than we think. And I think also in US there's now discussions about mixed use, land mixed use land policy, and how to make this happen, and also this realization of the crisis that climate change is now, coming around. I think a lot of resource investment on the idea can also happen.
Yeah, I would just add, there's a very important link that you just caused me to think about, Shail, which is between the local food system, which is something we are always advocating in Local Futures, and so many people are working towards relocalizing food system, and car-centered development, and that link obviously is the destruction of farmland and the loss and conversion of land to highways, to roads. And this is happening, unfortunately, everywhere, as far as I know. Even at the same time as there are these movements. So bringing together like land conservation activists, like those working on land trusts, working to secure permanent protection of land for food production, and the car-free movement, I think would be a really important link also.
Yeah, definitely. I think they all also come together to monetization of nature, that is facilitating these things. If you evaluate like, oh, if you keep this as a farmland, how much do you earn per year? And then if you sell it, and so this idea about monetization of resources, including time and even human resources, like we have accepted to be taught to regard ourselves as a financial resource, so to speak, and that's where everything bottles down to like how monetization plays a very important role in this. And and so it really defines the level of acceptance to the discomfort that we emotionally experience, but then buy into those ideas.
Definitely. Yeah. Carly, were there any other questions in the Q&A?
We do have some other great suggestions coming in on the chat about policies we can use. Chandra Khan says that Singapore has a great policy of allowing cars only during non-rush hours and an emphasis on public transportation, just as one example. So there are, even in cities where the infrastructure is a bit set and immovable, policies can make a really great difference. So I wondered if now would be a good time for me to share some photos that I've collected of car-free city areas, both ancient and modern examples. And then as I go through the photos, Shail and Alex, feel free to comment on what you see as well. Yeah, so the first couple of photos I have are actually from Bhaktapur, the example that Shail gave earlier. There's a pedestrian-only lane and another view of the city center that Shail mentioned. And this is a great point to bring in a comment from Peter earlier, who mentioned that the traditional architecture we saw in the slides of Bhaktapur has amazing zero power methods of cooling, air circulation, shade, insulation, shelter from the rain extending beyond the exterior walls, etc. That is actually far more advanced than expensive systems that require substantial power to work. Yeah, that's a great observation, Peter. And just again, showing how everything comes together in terms of creating a greater quality of life while reducing our energy and fossil fuel use with these ancient methods of planning.
When I visited there, I had the privilege of visiting, and it's also the case that many of the goods which are moved around are done by non-motorized means. So carts and sort of rickshaws and the like. And this also reminds me of some of the examples that we find a lot of inspiration in at local teachers. One that we've featured in our project called Planet Local is from Hungary, from Budapest, called Cargonomia. And this is another case where Bhaktapur is sort of like the ancient future, as Shail was mentioning earlier. And Cargonomia in Budapest similarly is like a very inspiring bicycle-powered cargo cooperative, moving locally produced organic food through the city and delivering it. So someone posted the link where we've written about that. So check that out. And again, yeah, to me, Bhaktapur once again looks like a good model of development, or de-development, if you prefer. Thanks.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. There's a car-free island in Greece named Hydra, and that uses, of course, boats to go from there to the mainland in Athens, and horses, mules, and donkeys as pack animals on the island. And all of the streets are simply for those draft animals and pedestrians. So I haven't been to Hydra, but I saw some examples of these like really small lanes that are really human scale and at the human pace of life, and apologies, also allow for extending public space into the street, like many restaurants here and in Monemvasia, Greece, where I have visited, have tables and like I'm extending into this space because people eating dinner and enjoying a good time is compatible with people walking along the streets and with animals moving along the streets. They happen at the same scale and at the same pace of life. So in a way, the streets, which, in Los Angeles, 70% of the land area is dedicated to transportation infrastructure, mostly for cars. Here, all of that becomes public and usable space. And Lowell makes a good point that the narrow streets are shaded as well, making a much more pleasant environment and reducing the heat island effect that raises the temperature in a lot of cities. So here's another place I've been to. This is the town of Moulay Idris in Morocco, known as the holiest city in the country. And the old town is the mound in the background here. And that part is entirely car-free. And this newer center in the foreground of the photo, you can see there are a couple of vehicles there, but that the wide space is still dominated by pack animals and by pedestrians in the shops along the street. So this is a photo I took. This is what the majority of the city looks like, is these narrow lanes along the hillside with buildings that are, again, at a human scale and human pace. And one thing that I saw was donkeys moving along these narrow lanes, collecting compost from all of the houses to take to the surrounding farms. And again, this is the area of Moulay Idris where vehicles are allowed. But the culture of the area is such that people have always, since the beginning of when the city was built, recognized the need to keep streets in the public realm and at the human scale. Even though cars can go through this area, you can see that it's still very much an area for public life and for pedestrians. So those are examples from ancient cities. One more modern example is the island of Gili Air in Indonesia, which I visited many times during my 4 years living in Bali. So here, the island is entirely car-free. So here from left to right, you can see that many people get around by bicycle. People also use bicycles for selling food and other goods. Many goods are taken around by these utilitarian horse-drawn carriages. A lot of folks are walking. And then people and goods are coming to the island from mainland Lombok by boat over on the right. So here's a view of one of the typical interior streets of the island with pedestrians and horse-drawn carts sharing the same space. Again, narrow roads means a lot more shade from the sweltering heat there. And Alex, you mentioned that a lot of building up of roads and car infrastructure is done in the name of accessibility. So just mentioning that there are ways to have these walkable streets be accessible for those who have more trouble walking. So we have some of these horse-drawn carts that have shaded roofs and sort of plush seats for folks like this elderly woman who might otherwise have difficulty getting around in a car-free area. And lastly, I saw scenes like this all the time in Gili Air. Children occupying the entire street, having fun without any fear of getting run over in these areas. And this is, Shail, you mentioned the monetization of just about every aspect of our lives, from our time to our roads to nature itself. And you simply can't put a price on these children laughing and having fun and playing in the entirety of the public space of the island that is their home.
Sadly, in the sad part of the car-centric part of Nepal, even here, kids are forced to play bicycles in the rooftop because the street is not safe. I think that's a tragedy that I don't think the human species really would consciously want to decide. But then, we build our cities such that once you grow too old, unable to, to experience the chaos of the street or to drive, then you're forced inside a house. Either you need to be rich enough to afford a driver, or you're forced inside a house, or your kids are, so it's it's a tragedy. And definitely I think this is one reason why this freedom of kids is one reason why car-free cities make so sense. And I think this smile or people has grown, kids who has grown in a more open society like the one we see in the picture, is also one way to make sure that the future generation is generous enough, who believes in the nature, taking care nature of human beings or the society. And I think one of the reasons why, the social, the structure of the city that is discouraging, social connections in between neighborhoods is one reason why we feel so isolated as a youth, or we feel we do not trust the society. And I think this one element of how car-centric development takes away a lot of beautiful aspect of being in a urban context. It takes away the beauty of being in a city.
Yeah, it also alienates us from nature. So I think this is very connected to this nature deficit disorder that's seems to be such a chronic problem for children growing up today. And so, I mean, this photo, obviously, this is a place with a lot of natural beauty surrounding, but it shows just like how a non-car design facilitates connection also to the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
Yeah, I also want to, based on the discussion that we're having here, about how public transport can replace private cars, and this interaction about how we also need to redesign for the principle of localization. I also wanted to share that even in Kathmandu, in official registration, the density difference between traditional settlements or settlements built for people and the modern settlement that is built for cars. In traditional settlements, per hectare, there's 1,000 people who live in a hectare of land, and in the modern car-centric development, it's only 150. So it's that you can also see how much more land is needed when you are developing for cars, and how that takes away those lands that could either be nature, that could be, or could be used for agriculture, you know. So even in a simple context, you know, 1/3 of land can be enough. It is if it is built for people, and with ample public space in it, you know, and that means a lot of reduction in infrastructure cost or the maintenance cost, and also the possibility of having farmlands close by, you know, that scope also comes in. So yeah, definitely. I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Shail. I agree. Yeah, having denser yet more livable human settlements does open up more area around, both for, as you mentioned, connections with the surrounding agriculture, both economic and you know, cultural or spiritual connections, as well as with wildlands, leaving corridors for wildlife, as Alex mentioned earlier, about tying into the conservation movement. So I see we're nearing the end of our hour and a half, but I think I'll go ahead and flip through a number of these other photos. So this is Gili Air, again, is a car-free island in Indonesia. And I have one other car-free island here in the US, actually, Mackinac Island in Michigan. So this island as well, it's a small island in a lake in the northern part of the country. And many folks are getting around by bicycle, as well as horse-drawn carriage. So not so different than Gili Air, but in a US context. And both of these places are, as I've mentioned earlier, relatively touristy. But again, I don't see that as a fault of the places, but rather as an indicator that this is something that people are longing for. And we have to think about how not to relegate this to simply tourist areas, but to draw inspiration from these places and use that inspiration to advocate for these types of changes in our communities where we conduct our everyday lives. So moving to areas that are not totally car-free, but are implementing strategies to mitigate cars. This is in Barcelona, a place I have not been, where they're implementing the concept of super blocks, which are areas where people live in one of these blocks, and there are basically no cars inside the block, but there are many of the shops, sort of like the 15 or even 5 or 2 minute city concept, where people can hang out with their neighbors in public spaces and access most of what they need every day in terms of social and economic nourishment without venturing into the arteries. Although the arteries too are becoming less car-centric and more for bicycles. So I have a few more photos. So this is the interior of one of the super blocks. Again, entirely devoted to public spaces. And one of the arteries here is dedicated mostly to bike lanes.
This is a really good example, popular as well, to see how like car-centric, you know, settlements can, you know, redesign themselves to be more car-free, or to be more, you know, instead of like for Nepal, like the largest city Kathmandu is also like you know, half an hour bicycle radius city, you know, if you're talking only about the ring road. But then even in the West, you know, where we might think like our free dream is too far, I think like this is a very good example of how we can do it, and already existing settlements. I think another good example is from Paris as well, where they brought back experience of a beach over you know, a riverside highway, where they put in sands aptly weekly initially, and then, you know, created beach out of the place, and then permanently made them car free. So if you have a river that is going through, you can also turn them into a more car free area. So I just could
Yeah.
remember some of those examples. Yeah.
Agreed. And it looks like Barcelona has done that as well, not with the super blocks, but with this large pedestrian thoroughfare called La Rambla. I think it's about 1.3 kilometers or just shy of a mile long. that was created out of a dry riverbed. So it's an aerial view and then a street view of La Rambla. And I don't have any pictures of Paris, but I'm sharing one example from the neighborhood I lived in Washington, D.C. for 3 years, Adams Morgan, where they didn't build that into the city planning from the start, but during the pandemic, this is from July 2020, they trialed having a road closure of one of the main economic thoroughfares of the area. So they first put in a bunch of Jersey blocks on the edge to turn one entire lane of traffic into extra outdoor seating to support the restaurants during the pandemic. And then for a period of time, they closed off the entire road and turned it into a pedestrian thoroughfare. And as far as I recall, it was quite a hit, as in people loved it. But the city ended up discontinuing the pedestrian thoroughfare in the center because of concerns around, quote, safety that I didn't fully understand at the time and still don't. But at least the one lane on each side dedicated to the restaurants is still present, and I think it'll be an enduring feature. Washington, D.C. is actually quite strong with both on-road and off-road bike lanes and advocacy for pedestrian and bike infrastructure. This is a photo I took from my time working as a trail ranger for Washington Area Bicyclist Association, which is since 1970s has been advocating for bicycle-centric infrastructure and increased road safety and increased enjoyment of the natural areas through developing and maintaining these bike paths. So my job for a season and a half was to maintain these paths and also conduct outreach to make the trails a really friendly place. So this is just one example of one of our off-road trails in the city, and just off to the left is the metro line. So they're using the space next to the buffer space next to the metro subway system to create these alternative forms of transportation far away from cars. And some of the storefronts are backing directly onto this bike lane, as well as to the road on the other side of the building. So speaking of public transit and bikes and pedestrians sharing the same space, this is an example from Kuratiba in Brazil. As you can see from this photo, Kuratiba has a world famous bus system. And one of the features here is that they have really safe, obvious sheltered pedestrian entrances and exits into the bus. And the buses share a lane with the bikes, you can see on the right, as well as pedestrians in this public space. And the cars off to the left are cordoned off with a fence to make sure that they do not interact with these more human pace and scale transit measures at all. And yeah, several cities have tried buses and bikes in the same area with the idea that bus drivers will have a lot more awareness of bicycle use and that therefore those are more compatible modes of transportation. Again, on the issue of accessibility, there are ways to make this work for folks who might otherwise have a harder time getting around using public transit. So back to the example of Vauban that I mentioned earlier. Again, we're moving now into examples where people are creating settlements from scratch, essentially. Again, this was an abandoned military base that residents sort of occupied and took into their own hands and designed the city that they wanted to live in. So this is an example of the interior with parks and off-road bike and pedestrian trails, and houses are fronting onto these areas. And another photo from the interior of Vauban. And even such things as signage can make a really big difference in people's awareness of how space is shared. So this is an example of a sign painted onto the street in Vauban, inviting people to be mindful and share the space.
One thing we also emphasize a lot at Local Futures is, in addition to all of these wonderful examples of transforming cities, which we have to do, we realize that so many policies today are pushing more and more urbanization and expansion of cities. So I think it's important to also, at the same time as we transform the cities that we have radically, to also rethink the policies and change them that are driving so many people off of the land into cities and increasing urbanization. I think these go together nicely. I mean, there's no contradiction there for me. So I guess that's just a kind of link to what I was saying earlier about the imperative of protecting farmland, but that would also extend to rural communities and finding healthier balance between the rural and urban, where there's a sort of synergistic relationship, like what you'd see in Bhaktapur, really, where so much of the food is supplied locally. Like the example you gave, Carly, so much of the food waste is returned to the local soils. Unlike so many cities today, where it's just sort of a waste generating machine, taking in resources from the global economy, from the global, the planetary mine, and then returning it to landfills and sewage treatment plants and so on. So yeah, just sort of a bit of an aside, but one that I think is an important element to this movement as well.
I just wanted to see that these transitions, they thrive in the belief in innovation, in rethinking, in how much daring we are about believing in a new way of thinking the world around us. And I think COVID quite gave us a very good, very good platform or time to experience that. How was many cities around the world who thought like it would take like ages to make some streets car free, suddenly became such an happening place, and many of them turned into permanent experience as well. Something else that was coming into my mind when Alex was sharing about his comments on the pictures was that also when we're talking about rural urban equity, or the just relation in between, the other way how they do it traditionally in Bhaktapur is that they have certain annual festivals that are less ritual and more of a social exercise, where some of these annual festivals like chariot moving festivals, where different parts and neighborhoods have a very important role to play, which can't be replaced by somebody else, where there is equal presence and participation of urban neighborhoods, semi-urban, and the rural neighborhood. So those annual festivals make them come in presence of each other, and if and that is, there is that one good way of ensuring that they know each other well, and in a very just and equal relation to each other. And I think that is one way to, I think the present, this idea about that the world is more urbanized, or the population wants a more urban future is in fact a symptom, or the result of outcome of an unjust urban rural relation that is creating this immigration towards the urban centers. And I think there's so many lessons from the past, not necessarily only from Nepal, but all around, from indigenous cultures, that we can seek answers to. And I think yeah, and especially when things are localized, I think scale also makes a lot of difference in making things right and just, and when our economies and when our society and things localize, we can see the impact of our actions. We can see it in people that we can interact with or we cross through in our everyday life. And yeah, I think, yeah, car-free cities make that also possible. And also, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Shail. Yeah, I think tying it all together, you just tied it all together. It's like car-free, decentralization, deceleration, slowing down, food sovereignty, these all go together. Zero waste. I mean, it's all linked up. So thank you so much for excellent summary.
Thanks so much again for joining us, Shail and Alex and everyone. If you're inspired by what you've heard today, please do check out our Localization Action Guide, where we list a number of resources and examples that can help make this future a reality for all of us, no matter where we live. And yeah, we will be sharing the recording within a few weeks, as well as some of the photos that we've shared in the call and other resources from both us and participants. So thanks so much again for joining us today, and we'll see you at our next Voices from the Field episode, details to be announced. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Shail. Bye, Alex.
Bye. Thanks, Shail.